Picture this. You're a kid, you have not eaten properly in days, your stomach hurts in that quiet, empty way. You stumble through a forest, cold air, wet leaves, everything smells like dirt and pine. And then you see it. A little cottage with walls made of bread, a roof that looks like cake, windows that look like sugar. You take a bite, and a sweet old lady opens the door and says, "Come in, my dears, I will feed you." Wait, because that is not a wholesome fairy tale moment. That is the moment you realize you just walk into the most perfectly designed trap for starving children. And if you grow up thinking Hansel and Gretel is a cute story about candy and teamwork, today is the day we ruin that in the best way. Hi babe, welcome back to Dark Fairytale series where we take the stories we were handed as kids, peel off the cute coating and find the nightmare underneath. Today, Hansel and Gretel, the gingerbread house, the abandoned kids, the witch, and the part everyone ignores, which is honestly the scariest part. The monster in this story is not a witch, it's hunger. And how fast hunger can turn a whole family into strangers. Stay with me, because once you see the real engine behind this tale, it hits completely different. And then it gets worse. Not gore worse, history worse. Because this story didn't appear out of nowhere. Alright, quick rules before we jump in. In this video, I'm separating what is actually in the Brothers Grimm tale and documented variants. What historians and folklorists suggest about where these motives come from, and what is modern interpretation or theory. If something is unconfirmed, I will say it's theory or interpretation. No misinformation soup, I promise. Now, let's get the context in place. Hansel and Gretel is a German fairy tale collected by the Brothers Grimm and published in their collection Children's and Household Tales in 1812. It is set in a vague medieval Germany vibe, but like most folk tales, it does not give you a neat date or a specific town name. It just gives you the atmosphere. A poor family, a huge forest, a famine. And children who become very, very alone. And yes, there are many versions, and the Grimm story changes across editions. That matters. But first, let me retell the Grimm version in a way that makes the emotional logic clear, because that's where the creep factor lives. Ready? Let's go. We start with a woodcutter, his wife, and 2 kids. They are broke. Like, not cancel Netflix broke. More like, there is no bread and winter is coming broke. A famine hits the land, food becomes scarce, and the parents start doing that thing where they whisper in bed like kids can't hear them. Which is hilarious because kids have superpowers when it comes to overhearing the exact one conversation you wish they would not hear. The wife tells the father, "We cannot feed them. Take them into the deepest part of the forest and leave them." The father resists because, of course, these are his kids, and the wife pushes, and he gives in. And Hansel hears everything. This is our first character beat. Hansel is not naive. He is a child, yes, but he's already in survival mode. That night, he sneaks outside and gathers little white pebbles. In some tellings, they are described as shiny in the moonlight. He fills his pockets. The next morning, the parents lead Hansel and Gretel into the woods, and Hansel drops the pebbles behind them like a tiny, stressed-out GPS system. They go deeper. The trees get thicker, the light fades. The parents make a little fire, hand the kids a piece of bread and say, "Stay here, we are going to cut wood. We will come back." No, because what? This is the oldest lie in the book. Night falls. The parents never return. And Gretel starts crying, which, listen, people clown on Gretel for this, but I would also cry if my parents abandoned me in a forest. Actually, I would cry so hard I would become the forest new river. But Hansel goes, "I've got this." The moon comes out, the pebbles shine, and the kids follow them home. They knock on the door. The father is relieved. The wife is furious. And now the story gives us a weird little emotional whip splash. Everyone goes back to normal for a second. But the food runs out again. And the wife says, "We are doing it again." This time Hansel tries to get pebbles, but the door is locked. So he does the only thing he can do. He takes his little piece of bread and crumbles it, leaving a trail of crumbs. And I love Hansel, I really do. But his plan is, babe, a breadcrumb trail in a forest is like trying to hide your money by sprinkling coins behind you in a shopping mall and hoping nobody picks them up. Birds exist. Wind exists. Also, your crumbs are not reflective. They do not glow. They are bread. Anyway. The parents abandon them again, deeper than before. Night falls. Hansel and Gretel try to follow the crumbs, but the birds have eaten them. Now they are lost. And this is where the story changes from cruel parents to full survival horror. The kids wander for days. They eat almost nothing. In some tellings they mention berries. The forest is huge. The hunger gets louder. And then, finally, they see it. A cottage made of food. Walls made of bread. Roof like cake. Windows like sugar. And the kids do not knock. They do not ask for help. They start eating the house. And before anyone in the comments goes, "How rude!" Imagine you are starving, like truly starving. You stop caring about social rules. Your brain goes into one mode, eat. So they eat. And then they hear a voice. "Nibble, nibble, little mouse, who is nibbling in my house?" Wait, that rhyme is creepy. Like, it's cute in the way a porcelain doll is cute. You know what I mean. The kids panic and say, "It's the wind." And I need to pause on this because this is my favorite kind of fairy tale logic. A child is actively chewing on a sugar window and their defense is, "It's the wind." And the witch is like, "Okay, sure." Either she is extremely polite or she is already mentally writing her menu. The door opens. An old woman appears. She invites them in. She feeds them. She gives them warm beds. And the kids fall asleep. And this is the moment the story twists the knife. Because this is not a sweet old lady. She is a witch who built a candy house to lure children in so she can eat them. She locks Hansel up and forces Gretel to work. In the Grimm version and in many retellings, the witch fattens Hansel up. She checks his finger to see if he is plump enough. Hansel, absolute legend, hands her a bone instead of his finger because she can't see well. And she keeps thinking he's still too skinny. After weeks, she gets impatient and decides she will eat him anyway. Now the climax. The witch heats up the oven and orders Gretel to check if it's hot enough. Gretel pretends she doesn't understand, and the witch, in the dumbest villain moment imaginable, demonstrates. She leans into the oven. Gretel shoves her in, door shuts, witch gone. The kids free themselves, find treasure in the house, stuff their pockets with jewels, and run. They eventually reach home, and in many versions the wife is dead or gone. The father reunites with them, and the family is suddenly fine because treasure. And that's the story. Now, why does this story exist? Here's the thing. Hansel and Gretel is not really about a witch. It is about the fear that home can become unsafe. It is about hunger. It is about abandonment. And then it is about children learning to outsmart the thing that wants to consume them. That's why it sticks. Now I want to talk about the Brothers Grimm for a second, because people always say the original Grimm version as if they invented it. They were collectors and editors. Jakob and Wilhelm Grimm were German academics who gathered folk tales as part of preserving cultural heritage. They were living in a time when German identity and culture felt threatened by political upheavals, including Napoleon's influence across parts of Europe. Collecting stories was, for them, a way of preserving something national. Also, their first audiences were not necessarily children. Their work began in a scholarly context. The kids' bedtime book reputation came later, partly because the stories became widely popular. And the story itself? They didn't just pull it from the air. Scholars argue they heard versions of it from people around them, including Georgian Wilde, who later became Wilhelm's wife. So this tale is not just Grimm wrote a spooky story. It's a story shaped by oral tradition, retellings, and then edited across multiple published editions. And yes, they changed it. Across editions, the Grimms added length, more imagery, more motivation. Many tales also became more Christian in tone over time. And one of the biggest shifts in Hansel and Gretel is this: mother versus stepmother. In early versions and early Grimm editions, the cruel woman can be described as the children's mothers in places. Later editions lean harder into the stepmother role. Why? We don't have a single official confession like, "Hi, it was me, Wilhelm Grimm, and I changed it because..." So we talk in interpretations. One interpretation is that it protects the idea of motherhood. It is psychologically easier for a society to accept a stepmother did it than a mother did it. Another interpretation is social reality. In earlier centuries, women died more frequently in childbirth, remarriage happened more, blended families were more common, and tensions could exist. Stories reflect what people recognized. And here's alternative perspective number 1. Some people say this is just sexism. It turns adult women into villains and makes the home safe only when the woman is gone. Other people say it's symbolic. The stepmother represents the breakdown of protection and care, not literally women as evil. I think both can be true. Folk tales can carry real bias and real symbolism at the same time. Now let's talk about the biggest theme that connects this story to history: famine. Many folklorists and historians connect the child abandonment motive to real hunger crisis in medieval Europe. One famine period often discussed is the Great Famine of 1315 to 1321, when extreme weather and crop failures hit parts of Europe. Food shortages, soaring prices, and widespread suffering. Now, I want to be careful here. People online love to say, medieval people were eating their children and it was totally normal. That is not a responsible way to frame history. There are accounts and accusations of cannibalism in extreme famine contexts in various times and places, including medieval famines, but we should treat those claims carefully. They are reported as extreme, desperate acts, and sometimes appear in sources that also include rumor, moral panic, or sensational storytelling. So the accurate takeaway is this: famine creates fear of the unthinkable. And Hansel and Gretel is basically that fear turned into a story. Parents are so desperate they abandon children. Children are so hungry they eat a stranger's house. A witch is so predatory she uses food as bait. Everything in the story revolves around food. And I hate that this makes sense, but it does. Because hunger is not just physical. It changes your brain. It changes your morals. It changes what good means. When you are starving, good becomes alive. And that is a terrifying truth to look at directly, which is why people put it into stories, so they can look at it sideways, through candy and witches and forests. Now, the forest. The forest is not just a background. In medieval and early modern Europe, the forest was a real place of danger and unknown. You could get lost, you could get hurt, you could never come back. It was also a place of folklore and superstition, a place where other rules apply. So sending children into the forest is not just dramatic scenery. It is sending them outside the protection of society, outside law, outside safety, into the wild. And a witch living deep in the forest makes sense in that symbolic logic. She is the thing waiting beyond civilization. Now, why a witch specifically? Witches are a staple of folklore worldwide, but in Europe, belief in witchcraft was widespread for centuries. Witch trials and persecutions peaked in certain periods and places, and the scale and intensity varied by region. Estimates about executions vary, but historians often discuss tens of thousands of executions across Europe, with the majority being women. And again, YouTube-friendly tone here, because this is real history and real suffering. The point is to not sensationalize it. The point is to understand why folktales become obsessed with witches as a symbol. After communities live through fear, accusation, and punishment, stories start to reflect that. Defeating the witch becomes a fantasy of defeating the thing society is terrified of. And in Hansel and Gretel, the witch is not just magic evil. She is predatory. She uses hospitality as a mask. She weaponizes food. She isolates children. That is why she feels so modernly creepy, because it's not just cackling and spells, it's manipulation. Now let's go even deeper into why this story is so sticky. Because Hansel and Gretel belongs to a larger family of tales. Folklore is classified under a tale-type system called Arne Thompson-Utter, and Hansel and Gretel is often treated as a key example of ATU 327A, which involves children falling into the hands of an ogre or witch and escaping through cleverness. The show me how avant trick is a recognizable motive in this family. And once you know that, you start seeing it everywhere. There are French stories with similar abandonment and trial motives, like Hop on My Thumb. There's Finette Syndrome with threat and trails, and an ogre and a hag. There's an Italian variant by Giambattista Basile, where the father leaves a trail of oats and an animal eats it. There are Slavic tales with Baba Yaga, the witch in the woods, children in danger, the theme of survival through cleverness. So Hansel and Gretel is not a lonely weird story. It is part of shared European nightmare library. And the shared nightmare is this. Children are vulnerable. Adults fail them. The world is hungry. Survival requires cleverness. And the forest holds things that want to consume you. Now, there is another layer people sometimes miss, and it is honestly kind of darkly funny. Because if you summarize Hansel and Gretel very bluntly, it sounds like two kids vandalize a house, they kill the homeowner, they rob the place, and then they go home and everyone is like, yay, family reunion. I'm not saying that's morally accurate. I'm just saying it's the kind of plot that makes you realize how wild fairy tales are. Every time I imagine the kids eating the house, I picture myself at 2 a.m. opening the fridge like a raccoon, eating shredded cheese straight from the bag, thinking, this is fine. Now imagine that energy, but it's a house in the woods with a witch inside. No, because what? I almost forgot to mention something important, and I'm coming back to it now, the duck. In some versions, after they escape the witch, the children reach a body of water and a duck or swan helps them across. This motif appears in later editions and some variants, and is one of those folkloric elements that drifts in and out depending on the storyteller. And people love making fun of it, like a duck carried two children across a river. I mean, have you seen a duck? But in story logic, it's a soft landing after the intense witch section. Nature becomes a helper. The world stops being hostile for a second. It's like the story says, you survived the worst. Here, take this gentle moment. Breathe. And it also moves them from the witch's territory back toward home, back to society, which brings us to the ending. The wife is often gone by the time the kids return, sometimes said to have died from unknown causes. And the father becomes the safe parent again. And the treasure fixes the poverty. Now, alternative perspective number 2. Some people read this ending as comforting closure. The cruel force is gone, the family is reunited, survival is secured. Other people read it as disturbing. The father participated in abandoning them. then gets redeemed without consequences, and the bad woman conveniently disappears, restoring patriarchal safe home structure. Both readings exist, and both have weight. Folktales often try to restore order at the end, even if the path there is more messy. Now, let's talk about the real reason people obsess over the true story behind Hansel and Gretel. It is not because anyone seriously believes there was a literal gingerbread house. It's because people can feel that the story comes from a real fear, real hunger, real danger, real abandonment, real uncertainty. And when you learn about medieval famines, child abandonment practices in desperate times, and how communities use stories to process fear, Hansel and Gretel stops being random. It starts looking like a cultural scar. A story that says, this is what we are afraid could happen. And the witch is the perfect villain for that fear, because she embodies two nightmares at once. Nightmare 1, a stranger who pretends to be kind, and Nightmare 2, hunger, personified, waiting to consume you. Now, this is where I want to connect it to why the story still works today. Because we do not live in the medieval Germany, but people still love this tale. Why? Because the emotional engine is timeless. It is about a betrayal that hits right at the base of human trust. Your parents, your home, your safety. And then it is about kids becoming competent under pressure. Hansel is the planner, Gretel is the finisher. She is the one who acts at the peak moment. And that's why people remember her. Because she is not saved by her parents. She saves herself and her brother. The story gives you a fantasy of agency. Even if adults fail you, you can still outthink the monster. That message is powerful, especially in the world where people often feel powerless. Now, one more thing, because it's too good not to mention. There was a famous hoax in the 1960s by a German author, Hans Drexler, who wrote a book pretending an amateur archaeologist uncovered evidence that Hansel and Gretel was based on real events. It became a sensation for a while, then he admitted it was a hoax. And honestly, that tells you everything. People want it to be real, not a candy house part. There was something dark behind this part, because it feels like it. Now let's bring it home. When you strip away the frosting, Hansel and Gretel is a survival story wearing a fairy tale costume. It is a story about hunger and what hunger does to people. It is a story about kids navigating a world where adults are unreliable. It is a story about temptation that looks like rescue, and it is a story about turning the trap back on the predator. And I think that's why it's so unforgettable. Because it's not just scary, it's emotional and true. So here is my question for you. Do you think Hansel and Gretel is mainly about warning about strangers and temptation? Or do you think the real horror is that the first betrayal comes from inside the home? And also, be honest, if you saw a perfect little candy house in the middle of a forest, would you take a bite? Because I want to say I'd be smart, but I know myself. I'd be like, just one nibble. And then I'd be the cautionary tale. If you enjoyed this, hit like, subscribe, and tell me what fairy tale you want next for the Dark series. Snow White? Little Red Riding Hood? The Little Mermaid? Sleeping Beauty? Drop your pick in the comments and send this video to that one friend who still thinks this story is just cute gingerbread vibes. Because babe, it's not. And that's exactly why we can't stop talking about it.